The Personnel and Industrial Security Mission has undergone major changes in the course of the past several years. In October of 2019, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency was formed. On March 30th of 2020, William Lietzau took over control of the newly formed DCSA. The mission of DCSA is currently significant. It includes the background investigation process, it includes a key education mission across the Department of Defense, and it includes the government's industrial security and critical technology missions. Join us as we sit down with Director Lietzau to discuss industrial security, personnel security, and all of the major changes and challenges taking place within DCSA. So basically, I just want to kind of launch and just ask you kind of what have you learned in that first year within the organization? What have maybe some of the key challenges and accomplishments been that you would like the folks who visit ClearanceJobs to know about?
You know, I guess the most important thing I've learned since getting here is how important the work of this agency is. I don't know to what extent you've tracked me, but I kind of come here more of an organizational leader, a transition integration manager, not necessarily because of my detailed security background. So when I got here and started, getting a better picture of the threats that we face from our counterintelligence team, our insider threat team, and I kind of looked at the vulnerabilities that our industrial security folks and our personnel vetting team are looking at, I realized this is just dead center in a current ongoing fight with adversaries that not a lot of people in the United States realize how much is going on right now. And so just it's been a great learning experience for me because it puts me in a position where I can't imagine a job I would want more than this one, quite honestly, as I come to recognize how important what our employees do every day is. And yes, you mentioned the successes. It has been such a pleasure to recognize the work of the employees of this agency and just kind of their attitude. It's I come at a time as you know where the agency's been transitioning substantially, really transforming. We're multiple agencies, offices, groups that have come together and been put together into a single agency. Having kind of been there before, that's tough with any organization. It's incredibly tough to do that and continue accomplishing your mission at the same time. And that's what this team has done. They've not only done that, but they've done it in a way that's improved the mission performance. So while we're transitioning, integrating, and transforming into something new, we're reducing the backlog of investigations, for example. We're reducing the timelines to get a top secret clearance, for example. There's been mission improvement while going through that transition. And then if I can brag a little bit more about my employees, they've been doing it at a period of time when the policies have also been changing. So you have a movement from the traditional periodic reinvestigations into a continuous vetting mode, different things changing. And then of course, pile on top of that, COVID. I think COVID has affected organizations, companies, and certainly government agencies in huge ways. Yet this team of professionals here that's kind of in a daily fight with a real adversary that's out there is actually improving their performance while going through COVID too. So I could not be happier with the DCSA team that I've been privileged to adopt. And like I said earlier, I couldn't imagine a better job to be in right now.
Well, you're speaking a language that's near and dear to my heart, being a part of the ClearanceJobs.com platform, because that's what we talk about all the time is like the importance of a quality workforce, especially in the national security space. Obviously, it's huge. DCSA is a fairly new organization. We know the personnel security side of the mission intimately, but that's really only one piece of what you do. So maybe also to kind of explain what all has come together with this new DCSA organization, and maybe how some of those components work together.
Sure, we've got, I mean, if you look at our mission being kind of delivering to the United States and our national security establishment a trusted workforce, and then also a trusted contractor force, facilities and entities that we're vetting, and then also trusted systems, especially classified systems that are used by those contractors. If that's what we're delivering to the United States, that's a mission, or those are missions that are much more complicated and more sophisticated than they were, in a day gone by. When we're looking at the defense supply chain, for example, that's feeding our contractors' workforce, it's feeding what allows our personnel to do their jobs. The supply chain used to be fuel and foodstuffs and building materials and things like that. Now our supply chain involves software that was not made in a classified setting. It involves complex technologies that can be made more vulnerable. We call ourselves America's gatekeeper. And if you look at that panoply of mission sets that I just described, with personnel, industrial security, systems, that gatekeeper function far more complex today in 2021 than it was even a decade ago, and certainly than it was 2 decades ago. So you need all the various components to come together. You need a counterintelligence function that's telling us where to focus our efforts, not just generally, minding the gate all the time to make sure that nobody's getting in. We already know they're behind the gate. We already know that we've got adversaries who are stealing our technologies every day, that are trying to take advantage of vulnerabilities in some of those technologies, and they're trying to use some of our people who we put into our workforce. So it's just a much more complex environment, and so that's why all these things need to come together. Now, you asked too, what things have come together. Of course, just for those who don't know, probably the biggest one was the National Background Investigation Bureau, which was over at the Office of Personnel Management. We brought over thousands of government employees, probably about 10,000 contractors, a number of facilities, vehicles. That's probably the biggest moving part just over a year ago. If you look at what that merged with was the Defense Security Service. So you've taken 800-man, $800 million a year operation, and you merge it with multiple thousands and about $1.5 billion. And then we also brought in the Consolidated Adjudication Facility that's doing the vast majority of adjudications in the United States, that, coupled with the background investigations, the adjudication, there you've got the essence of your vetting capability. Then we've got a lot of other things that came in more recently, from defense, from DISA, the Defense Information Services Agency, and from DMDC. We brought in computer programs, some under development, some older that have to continue to be used. We went to OPM, and we eventually just recently brought in the legacy IT system. Pretty big product that we're now responsible to keep running. Remember, it's the one that was hacked a few years ago by the Chinese. And so we have to keep it protected while we're building the NBIS one. So a lot of moving parts. We have some things from DIA, the polygraph school just joined us in October. So a variety of offices and components to other agencies and departments that have moved into DCSA in the last few months. It really kind of complete the mission sets of being the gatekeeper, if you will, so that the rest of our government can do its work and know that it's got a trusted platform and trusted workforce to do it with.
Yes, you definitely touched on some of the key changes that have taken place. I also want to highlight some of the big accomplishments. Like when we look at processing times, which is one of the biggest questions we get at ClearanceJobs, we've had movement from 543 days for a TS clearance to, I think you're down to 158 days for a TS clearance. We had the 720,000 case backlog, I think we were talking about a couple of years ago. Now there is no backlog as far, I'm pretty sure it's pretty much steady state, but it's going to be hard to get that out of our vernacular for a while. I still hear that figure, but it seems like the cases are moving in and out. So what are some of the changes that, that have been implemented in the past kind of 2 years organizationally that have helped you reach some of those milestone accomplishments, and kind of what are you doing to continue that progress map forward?
Sure. No, in fact, I appreciate your noticing the reduction in timelines. I think we're actually down even a little bit lower than that right now. I'm trying to look at the last monthly report I put up. I want to say is for the background investigations about 90 days. And of course, you've got different components. You have an ingestion, you have a background investigation, you have an adjudication. And in fact, we moved the investigations down to, we actually hit below 80 days for a top secret recently for the investigation. It's gone back up a little bit. We do have COVID issues that prevent some of the more complex investigations from being completed as timely as we'd like. The adjudications, at least about 70% of the adjudications in the United States, which are the ones we handle, have gotten well below the 20-day recommended timeline. So we're under 100 days in many cases for a top secret. And really the primary mover is it really is the employee I was talking about earlier. I mean, because they not only did it, I know I'm bragging about my employees a lot here, but they deserve it. They did it while COVID was hitting as well. And talking to them, I'm realizing we put in place, of course, new policies. We put in place the ability to do teleconferences when appropriate. And the investigators have an ability to say, you know what, I think if this one needs to be in person, or this one should be not by telephone, but by teleconference. And so those are the kind of internal things. Of course, we used a lot of management techniques, Lean Six Sigma things, optimizations of our processes. COVID helped us in some ways because we were deploying a lot of IT equipment, that more so than we had before on the investigation side, for example. So a lot of laptops went out, a lot of agencies, believe it or not, were still using paper products. That also caused a little bit of a time delay. We moved all to electronic systems during COVID. This is a team sport across the security enterprise. It's really a lot of the assistance of the policy folks, the Performance Accountability Council, which is supporting the executive agent for security, DNI, and the executive agent for suitability, OPM. And they are, those executive agents were making policy decisions to assist us as we move forward. One example, during COVID, one of the, we found some things we could come up with workarounds, other things it was a little tougher. Fingerprints was one of the tough ones. It's taken us a little bit longer to get alternate fingerprint opportunities available when in fact the places they were normally going were shut down. What we got is a policy relief so that we could complete all the portions of an investigation, but for the fingerprints, save that for later. Things like that, that was an issue of us as the implementer working with the policy folks to really come up with ways to get the backlog down. And by the way, one last thing, I guess getting that backlog you spoke of down itself was a way for us to look at how we can optimize timelines. So now we're at a place where we're really able to, we're kind of fine tuning. Of course, it's like it's not a straight line, it's a curve. And we're approaching a limit, but I think there's still a few things we can do to improve some timeliness. The last email I looked at before walking into this room was from my head of background investigations, Christy Wilder, I had given her a task of identifying a few areas where we could shorten the timelines, and I got halfway through the email before they told me it was time to come in.
So you spoke about the COVID aspect, and I think that's definitely worth touching on too. We've been surprised, and I think candidates have been surprised that there have not been as significant of delays. I know some of those, some cases have kind of gone into this separate, COVID delays pile, but for the most part, cases are moving forward. So maybe speak to, did you have the policy and process in place pre-COVID to continue moving cases forward? Have you had to make any changes with COVID to keep those background investigations moving forward? And basically, how are you still getting work done in the COVID environment?
Yeah, no, and I probably just took most of the meat out of that my answer to that question during my last one, because I did mention a number of the things. I think there's, you can kind of summarize it as the policy changes that I spoke of, where the executive assistants assisted us when we identified the areas that would be tough to break through during COVID. I look at the process changes that we did, including technologies. A lot of work done by our IT team to allow people to work from home in some of the area, the fringe areas. It's not, of course, there's the investigator themselves. Everyone thinks of the investigator as the person who's out maybe questioning someone, because that's the closest that the public gets to the investigative process. But there's a lot of other work that's done pulling from databases. And so a lot of it was workarounds where we go to some of the data sources that were not able to be as responsive, a lot of things that are out of our hands, for instance, and in getting those data sources to have alternate means of passing us some of the information. So there was a little bit of a lag, but once we got past that and we were able to get the new processes in place, we've been able to keep reducing the timelines. I would still say somewhere north of 10% of our cases are still impacted by COVID, meaning there's something COVID related, or that we can't tell is COVID related, but we suspect it is, where we're relying on someone else to give us data to complete an investigation, and we can't quite get it, probably delayed by COVID. So we're hoping we can continue to speed things up a little bit more post-COVID.
So my next question, thinking about DCSA as a new organization, there are definitely going to be challenges as a new director and coming in. Can you maybe speak to a challenge that you've had to overcome, specifically as being the director of this organization, and really the first full director of a new government agency with a pretty significant, pretty high profile mission to accomplish?
Yeah, so there's obviously been a lot of challenges. I think, going back to my answer to your first question about recognizing how important the national security mission is for this agency, that's a pretty sobering thing to recognize. And where my first, the easy answer, anyone who's transforming a organization, an agency, a company, anything else, where you're integrating many parts coming together, you have all of the things that I shouldn't take them for granted, because maybe not a lot of people do go through that, but you're combining mission sets, people, different cultures, different ways of doing business, the back office kinds of things. How do you hire somebody? How do you, at what level do you have authority to make requests, change things? Lots of different policies that come from all those different constituent entities. And those have to all be rationalized. Also figuring out the back office things. For instance, when that very large component from the National Background Investigation Bureau came over, we didn't bring all the shared service infrastructure from OPM. So we're using the former DSS personnel resources, our human resource team, our former DSS legacy logistics components, for two examples, acquisition, and not immediately able to build them up to something that would accommodate that size. So you have all the normal integration things, and perhaps one of the biggest ones is getting that DCSA culture, something that goes with this. That's the emblem behind my head there, that the gatekeep that depicts the gatekeeper function that all of us play, recognizing that, we're America's gatekeeper in a number of ways, and a lot of cross-cutting ways too, training programs that cut across all of our mission sets, the intelligence activities that cut across all the mission sets. Bringing that together into one culture has got to be the hardest thing anytime you integrate. On top of that, though, back to the earlier point about the importance of the mission, every one of these mission areas needs us to step up our game. In the critical technology protection realm, we're going from a checklist kind of mentality where we're just a gatekeeper, literally, hey, let's identify any clear vulnerabilities. The lock is too thin for this safe. And recognizing, no, our adversary has much more sophisticated ways of getting access to critical information that we have to come up with a more nuanced approach. And not to mention the numbers. I mean, we're talking 10,000 companies that we're tracking on a regular basis just in the cleared component of what we do. Well, recent legislation gives us requirements that go further into the defense supply chain, including uncleared components to it. So we have to find a way to use fairly limited resources in a more directed way to really go after the threats that make us the most vulnerable in critical technology. NBIS, we haven't talked about the National Background Investigation Service, but a technology that is absolutely vital to being able to conduct our mission going into the future. We weren't poised to deliver that, consistent with some of the policy changes I mentioned that were taking place while we've been integrating. And we have to get that on track and delivering a capability in time for when we need it. We've got, I'm just trying to think of the other training mission. The Secretary of Defense this summer launched an operational security component just within DoD, an initiative, and who provides the training for those kind of security things. We do. We have a pretty robust training arm here, and they were able to do 5 million online courses in a matter of just about a month and a half. Impressive work by that team too. So there's a lot of, all of these represent kind of micro changes. I guess I would be remiss to not mention the obvious one of Trusted Workforce 2.0, where we're moving an entire government from a system that relied on periodic reinvestigations and one that's kind of moving us toward a continuous vetting scenario where we're daily looking at the people within our workforce to make sure we don't become, well, we don't have people who were once deemed trustworthy who have become less than trustworthy. Hence our insider threat programs, our continuous vetting programs. So you've got a lot of changes that are all going to have their own obstacles, and they are completely intertwined. You cannot move to a continuous vetting scenario without, for instance, the IT architecture that allows you to get there. And so we got to work unfortunately, a lot of people told me when you take over a job like this, pick one or two or maybe three things that you can accomplish during your tenure. And one of the difficulties we have is if you pick one or two or three, you've got so many that are interrelated. I can't just say, we're going to get continuous vetting up and running and leave our NBIS architecture unfinished. There's no way to do one without the other. And that really is true of all of our mission sets.
Thank you for joining us for part 1 of this conversation with DCSA Director Bill Lietzau. We hope you'll join us for part 2 of the conversation as we discuss more about Trusted Workforce 2.0 and why it represents one of the most significant changes to the background investigation process.